Welcome to Lift Your Story podcast with guest Dorsey Ross, motivational speaker. Hi everyone, I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with...
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
Today we are so pleased in this episode to have Dorsey Ross with us, and he is a motivational speaker. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dorsey.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So for our listeners that don't know, can you kind of explain Apert syndrome to us?
Yes, Apert syndrome is a congenital birth defect which affected my hands and my face. And when I was born, my forehead was pushed outward, my eyes and nose were pushed back in my head, and my fingers and toes were both fused together, meaning I had no individual movement of them. And my parents were, older in age. My mom was 41, my dad was 45 when they had me. So, and I was born on January 16th, 1977. So back then when they, were doing the testing, they didn't have all the technology and all the testing that they do today to determine the health of the baby and determine, what was actually going to happen with the baby. So they didn't know exactly that I was going to be born with a birth defect. So the doctors were surprised, when I was born, that I was born with this birth defect. So they rushed me off, the doctors did, to examine me and to see exactly the extent of the, I don't want to say damage, but the extent of the birth defect, and to see what was actually going to take place. And after they finished examining me, they also found out that I had no skull opening and no room for my brain to grow. And because of that diagnosis, the doctors came to my parents and said, look, we don't believe he's going to survive. We don't believe he's going to be able to make it. We think he'll eventually become brain dead, and to the best option that we can give to you guys is to sign the papers over and to put him into a institution. Thankfully, my parents were both people of faith and both, said, look, we can't do that. We can't give up on the son that God has given to us. And, we're not going to walk away from this child. Thankfully, they found out about a hospital in New York City that were doing operations on babies like myself. And the doctor there said, well, if he has the operation to open the skull to allow his brain to grow and allow it to function, allow it to grow, he'll have a lot of difficulties that he'll have to overcome and to deal with, but he'll survive. And I had my first of many operations at 6 weeks to open the skull to allow my brain to grow and to function, as normally as it could.
Wow. I'll tell you what, hats off to your parents.
No
Absolutely.
kidding.
Yeah, I mean, because you think back then, the people would have said, oh, well, it's just, okay. No, oh, yeah. Their faith was really a savior to you and them.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Amazing. And we really don't think about that, right? I mean, I know that when babies are born, they say there is that hole at the top, but we don't realize just how important that is. And you're just explaining that to us, that is necessary. And
Right.
Yeah. So when you were growing up, were you in public school or were you in what what's kind of what the word I'm looking for? Um, I guess it'd be school for people with issue. What's the word I'm looking for?
Disability.
I guess that'd be it. Yeah, I'm
Right.
trying to
And
think when I was back in school, what would they call that? I can't remember.
yeah, now they call it, special ed, but I did go to school from the time I was 5 years old, in grade kindergarten, or even kindergarten, all the way up to when I graduated high school. I went to the school for people with disabilities.
Okay, okay. And I'm sure that was kind of difficult, wasn't it, for you?
It was, it was difficult. Going to school was difficult. I think I had a learning, well, I still probably do it to an extent, have learning disability. And, certain classes were not, were very difficult for me. I didn't do well on certain tests. I didn't do well, math was not my favorite subject in the world. Um, so it was, those classes were difficult for me. And because of the operations that I had and I had to deal with, a lot of the schooling was even done at home through you know, through a tutor. And, basically what they have now, the homeschooling is what I had, when I was younger. They would have a special teacher come to the house to help me to keep up with the subjects and with, the schooling so that I can, keep up with it and not fall back too far and be able to, keep up with my classmates at that time.
So you graduated from high school, but and then you went on to college, correct?
I did go on to college. I went through 68 operations throughout my lifetime.
68?
Yes.
Wow.
And they, that was all for, reconstructive surgery of my face and my hands to separate my fingers and to, quote unquote, make me look more normal.
Mhm.
And what they would do with those surgeries was they would look at my dad and what he looked like, and they would try to, you know, shape my skull and to shape my face to make me look more like him at that time. And even after, like you're saying, going to college, going back even before I graduated high school, if because I went to school for people with disabilities, I had to have a meeting with my mom to, talk about that. What would I do after I graduated? Would I go on to college? Would I go on to, you know, go, just to go to a job or to, you know, go home and, just live at home or whatever. And my parents always supported me and always encouraged me to figure out for myself, what I could and could not do. And going to school, even as hard as it was for me, I wanted to see, would I be able to make it in college? Would I be able to, understand and would I be able to, do the homework and the work that was plausible to do in college. And the first couple of weeks that I was in school was very difficult for me, especially the community college. And I would get nervous, I would get upset, I would get frustrated. And I even had a point of time where I spoke to my mom and I said, look, I'm struggling here. What do you think I should do? And she encouraged me. She's like, well, take a couple more weeks, you know, we'll go, figure it out. And if it's still struggling after a couple of weeks, you know, we'll look at something else for you to do. And I found out that they had a Christian-based Bible study group on that campus, and I went to that Bible study group, and from the time I went there, I felt, loved. I felt accepted. Wasn't like when I was younger where people would, tease me and make fun of me and pick on me. And because of that, and because of that group, I felt, no more symptoms of being sick or being, anxious. And it wasn't like I was still anxious at times, but that motivated me to stay there. That motivated me to say, okay, I can meet people that I can connect with. I can meet people that I can, call my friends. If I went, basically went to a school where I knew everybody and I knew all the teachers by names. I knew all the, most of the students by names, to a school of a couple of thousand students, like, you know, the old adage is like going from a small pond to a bigger lake or even the ocean of you walk onto this campus where you don't know anybody.
Mhm.
So that's, I went to that school, got my associate's degree in liberal arts, but I still wanted to, go on. I felt like the calling on my life was to go into ministry, was to, to minister to the youth group or to the youth. And I went on to Bible college. And the first couple of years was, went well, was okay. But in 2002, I got a call from my sister that my mom had a stroke in August of 2002. And at the same time, I had fallen on the campus and I had broken my arm, but not realizing that I had broken my arm for at least 2 or 3 days
Oh, wow.
until it swelled up. And I went to a friend of mine and I was like, look at my elbow. I don't think this is normal. And he actually took me to the hospital and they, took X-rays and they're like, yeah, you broke your arm and you're gonna have to have pins put into it. So that was, basically overlapping with what happened with my mom. So, a lot going on at that time. And then a couple of months later, on December 7th, 2002, I got another call, you know, that my mom had passed away.
Oh, wow.
But I knew that my mom wouldn't have wanted me to quit. I knew that my mom wouldn't have wanted me to, she would have wanted me to continue on.
Mhm.
And my dad was still alive. He still is alive. And he supported me 100% to continue on with my education. Even after coming back from the funeral, I still, that same semester, I went back and finished the classes and finished the finals of that for that year. And even Bible college, several classes were difficult for me. I had to, you know, I even failed a couple of classes and had to take classes over again. But, perseverance is a very big part of my life. And, you know, my faith in God is a very big part of my life. And I don't give up very easily. And I wanted to push on and to see what would happen, what would take place. And on May 5th, 2005, I was able to graduate with a bachelor's arts degree in youth ministry.
I'll tell you what, man, you are very fortunate to have the parents you had.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're very fortunate to have also the determination to continue, because even just with parents, it's also you that did this, and that's amazing. And I was going to ask you earlier, what's your passion? Well, you told us what your passion is, what you enjoyed in school most.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing. That, and no wonder you're a motivational speaker, because this is all beautiful. And it's really interesting, because I was thinking, you know how you're being bullied, a lot of kids are bullied, and I would imagine your situation unfortunately was worse. But I think that children who were bullied, period, and even adults are bullied at kids who still haven't come to terms with it. This
Right.
is a big message, right? It's a big message that you do need to find your circle of people that accept you,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
right.
Now, I was bullied even going to a school for people with disabilities. I was bullied, you know, the kids in the school were mean, some of the kids in the school were mean, and they would tease not only myself, but other students as well.
Mhm.
And also in the outside world as well, I was, called names like monster and freak, and people would point and stare at me. And, obviously that has a lingering effect. And even,
Yeah.
to this day, sometimes walking outside or walking in the mall, you know, people would, maybe look at in my direction. And sometimes I would wonder, you know, are they looking at me? And, if they are looking at me, what are they thinking? What are they, what's going through their mind? If I
And
had,
having,
people would
yeah, I was
ask
gonna,
me, was I in the fire? Why, did, some, 9 times out of 10, they won't come up and ask me,
Mhm.
and I'm okay if they do, as long as it's, you know, as long as it's done in a good, natural way. If someone were to come up to me and say, "Hey, look, I see, you're different, or you know, you look different. Why do you look different? As long as they come up to me that way and they don't, sometimes I may be, taken aback by it, but I'm willing to tell my story. I'm willing to be open with my story and, share my story. And there are others that, they don't say anything. They'll just come up and start talking to me, which is, more natural and I think better anyway. And I think people, that do it that way will get to know me even better. And eventually they'll get to know my story, know what happened, and know, what I've been through.
Earlier you mentioned that they were trying to reconstruct you to look like your dad.
Right.
How successful were they at that?
I think they were pretty successful. I think, people will say, hey, you look like your dad, and, you
Yeah.
know,
So that has to make you feel good.
yeah, it does. It definitely does.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, you really are an inspiration. I mean, to 68 operations. Oh my gosh, I can't. That's just a number I can't wrap my head around.
Right.
I mean, and you got such a good outlook, and your story really is, it will inspire people not to give up, to fight. You can do it if you put your mind to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I travel around, the country sharing my story. That's why I have my own podcast now where I bring people on to share their own story of inspiration and motivational about what they've, been through in their own story of faith and overcoming obstacles and difficulties as well.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You're
and making people realize, sorry, I was just going to say, because I had a group of, I used to run this organization where they started businesses, and they had a group of people with disabilities, and they called themselves, they had abilities. They didn't like the dis on there. So we loved it. They came together. But the big thing for them was, I got them into the Chamber of Commerce. I was helping them to build that. It started before I got there, but I continued. And they said, you know what? Thank you for making us feel like people. Like,
Yeah.
that was, and to me, I thought, but you are. But that comment to me was something I will never forget. And taking them seriously in their business. And I thought, wow, I just did it. But now I understand that some people just don't get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I have my own question now because I'm curious. You can, they call themselves abilities. Do you know where that came from? Because my own school, not only did they have a school, they also had a program, a separate building and separate entity where they actually called themselves abilities. And like you're saying, they put the,
Oh, really?
they put the, I don't know what you would call it, but they put the, the around the disc and they just said abilities.
Yeah.
And that was, the founder, that's
Yeah.
that's who started that whole thing.
Small
Well,
world.
this was in 1999 in Canada. This little
Okay.
group brought themselves together.
Yeah.
And what they did is why they said abilities, because each of them had abilities. They
Right.
did have disabilities, but what they did is we're bringing our abilities together. There were a group of 5 of them,
Okay.
and they started a business. So that's why they called it that. So I don't know when this started, but yeah, this was in 1999 and
Yeah.
in Oakville, Ontario. So
Okay. Interesting.
That's a small world, isn't it? That they would have the same name.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well,
Very nice.
Dorsey, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, your listeners can reach out to me at my website, www.dorseyrossministries.com. You can find me on Facebook at Dorsey Ross. You can find me on Instagram at dorsey.ross. And you can find my own podcast show at it's called Dorsey Ross Show on any of the podcast platforms.
Great. Cool.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Love
Yeah.
this. It's very inspirational. Thank you very much for telling your story. This is what our program is about, and yours is truly very unique. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
And let your dad know that we were really impressed at your mom and dad, what they did for you.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is amazing. It really is. You're very fortunate. You're very fortunate.
And Dorsey, you're amazing too.
Yes,
Thank
you
you.
are. Yes, you are. Yes. I mean, I can say, I can just see the number of people you can inspire. I mean,
Right.
oh my gosh, you were in the perfect job for you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
it was wonderful to hear your story.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.